Regarding Judicial Performance Commission, Councilmember Coombs.
Yes, so thank you so much. This has already been before this committee one time and moved out of the committee at that time. It's basically just an opportunity to create more transparency in our judicial performance reviews. So the main thing it does is make them available online to the public, which they currently are not. It also moves up the date that they're released. And then the changes from last time is that I had some more time to stakehold with the judges about just how to make sure that the information that's getting put out there is as accurate and actually transparent as possible. So we had added that there would be validation of the surveys. So making sure that people actually have appeared before the judge that are filling out the surveys. And then also adding a couple notes into the evaluation as it's written, including denoting whether or not the judges oversaw any trials during their evaluation period, or if they had not, because jury trials tend to return more evaluations than when they're in non-trial divisions.
Anybody have any comments?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, we're good. That item moving forward. Item 4B, Judicial Performance Commission updates. Candace.
Hi, I would like to turn it over to John Hain. He's our chairperson for the Judicial Performance Committee. And he has a short presentation to give you in regards to the work that they've been up to for the last year and almost every year for some time. So thank you.
Thank you, Candace. May I use the table? Okay. I'd just like to defer the outline of the proposed legislation. And we have read that and we found it both interesting and helpful. We also had some questions about that. But first I want to bring you up to date, since I haven't talked in about 2 years, I believe, about how things are going with the commission, what we're doing, changes we've made. And I'm going to skip ahead because I have appeared before you. And I think that it's fairly clear what it is we're to do. Here are some of the sources of evaluation that we're now using. We have written statistical surveys coming in from an evaluation agency, Market Decision Research. They're the same agency that the county courts and some of the state courts are using, not only in our state, but others as well. So we're very pleased to have them. And we think they've improved our performance as far as gathering surveys and getting them out to the public. This statistical analysis comes to us this year in about a 112-page report. And it contains a lot of information for each judge, some bar charts, and this will be going to council members very shortly. I want to give you a quick summary of this. This year, we analyzed 3,405 questionnaires. 316 questionnaires went to attorneys. 118 questionnaires were disseminated to courthouse personnel. 600 questionnaires were distributed to the police department. And chiefs, we feel that the police are underrepresented in our survey responses. So anything you can do to help us get better performance and hear more from them, we'd love to work with you on that. 917 questionnaires were mailed to selected jurors. 1,384 questionnaires were mailed to randomly selected defendants who appeared in the court. Market Research sent out 66 emails to defendants and 288 emails to attorneys as a reminder that we'd love to hear their input. There was also a second reminder that went out May 23. We received out of that 3,405, 365 questionnaires. And That represents about an 11% response rate. My background is market research and statistics. And I can tell you that with clients I work with, that's a phenomenal response. Typically, we'd expect about 4 to 6%. And over the COVID era, we received about 6%. So we're improving there. The survey gave us information on 18 judges. One judge received only one survey. Now, is that concerning? Is that it makes statistical science very difficult to use to analyze a judge's performance. But I can tell you that the judge in question, with the one response, I personally watched him 3 days in traffic court, and he had over 85 contacts with the public. So why is that? Why does that happen? Well, let me explain some statistics that come back to us. So Judge Abel got 40 questionnaires. 75% of people responding said, retain this judge. He got 4% increase in the retention rate from last year. His skill rating stayed about the same as the year before. Here are some of the comments. And bear in mind that the research we get contains just verbatim comments from unnamed anonymous people. He's an excellent judge. We don't have any confidence in him. He causes unfair heartache to women, or he's the best judge ever, firm but fair. The next year, 33 questionnaires came back. Only 47% favored this judge's retention. That's a 28% decrease in retention rating from the previous year. His skill rating went down a little bit. This judge should be removed. He's very biased. I had a stellar experience with him. He murdered a dog that was protecting its family. He makes the city a joke. Well, which is the better judge? Does the research bear that out? No. It's the same judge. 1 year to another, this judge changed assignments and now is being evaluated more severely by attorneys, typically who appear in his court. His attorney evaluations went up. Know that attorneys, rightly, have more to evaluate when they rate a judge than just a juror, let's say, where if the judge has some good jokes, treats the jurors well, the jurors feel like they've been valued throughout the process, they rate the judge very highly. A couple of statistics about these judges. There's one judge this year, you'll see, he received only 10 responses. Another judge works very, very often in the court, received one response out of those hundreds of public contacts. And it was a stellar response. 100% of the 1% of people who responded said, this judge should be retained. Then you have a judge received 5 responses throughout the year, only 4 more. The retention rating for this judge, though, is only 60%. So the statistical science in this report doesn't always bear out what's going on in the courtroom. And that's why judicial performance commissioners go regularly to the courtrooms to see what's going on. Check the climate and find out what it feels like to be in front of this judge. And then we have 3 attorneys on the commission. We have 4 regular citizens like myself, and we're actively recruiting 2 more attorneys at this point. So we all get to compare notes, see from the attorney's perspective what it's like to be in front of this judge. Now, we want to have something that's transparent to the public or to council members at this time. Because right now, our recommendations are only our report. And council members can take it or they can leave it and make a decision on their own, which is how we operate. That's in our statute. And transparency is important to us, but let's compare a couple of things. What's factual? What's transparent? This is factual. It contains all the numbers. Is it transparent? With 112 pages? Probably not. If I want to vote as a citizen about a judge, will I read this? Or, like most people who are in a hurry building lives in Aurora, will you go, like me, to a bar chart for a judge? Look at that response and say, this judge is a stellar judge, I want to vote him in. Or look at a judge who only has 5 ratings, 60 and a 40% retention rating, and say, this judge needs to be out. Is that transparent? Well, there are a lot of provisos in here about the statistics that say statistical science can't make a decision. Hopefully, we make a better decision by observing. Another thing that comes out in the proposed legislation is creating proper criteria for the evaluation of judges. Right now, we use 23 different criteria. We would like to know if there are others that council would like to see that could be helpful. We were wondering if this is what is being called the aggregate report. Once again, is it transparent or is it just factual? And also, one thing that came up is how we should, if we're going to the next slide. Alternatives to these surveys. What would those look like? What could be provided that would validate this statistically? You know, statistics is kind of like shopping for a thermometer. Have you ever done that? You go to Home Depot and you look in the rack, there are 5 thermometers. Each one says something a little different. One thermometer that says 70, one that says 65. Which one validates which? How do you validate something that isn't scientific to begin with? We have made a stellar effort to locate those electronic email addresses, and we're improving that all the time. So the time that I've come to these meetings, I'm always impressed, and I'm sure I'll be impressed again, at what a tremendous effort it is, and so many agencies being coordinated to keep Aurora citizens safe and make them feel safe so they can thrive and become what they want to in the city of Aurora. And everybody on the commission, thanks you for that. Are there any questions? Yes.
Thank you. Could you show us Judge Day's evaluation, please?
You'll see that shortly. Right now, I think realistically, right now, we keep a kind of a firm hold on this between yourselves and ourselves, because again, if I'm a person in a hurry, ready to make a vote, and I have 18 seconds to mark a ballot for 18 judges, where am I going to look? I'm going to look at a bar chart that tells me a summary of the results. And is that realistic? We kind of question.
But I'll be mailing it to you next week.
One thing about Judge Day, though, something came up while I was observing him, and I think he's blushing. It was something very positive. And when we had our judicial interviews, I put him to task. I asked him, what goes through your mind when you're deciding a case like this? Those questions are important to us. Sometimes they reveal really interesting things. I remember a judge a long time ago who answered a pretty common question in those interviews, which is, what do you do for your self-maintenance? Judging is a stressful job. Yeah. This judge responded, well, that doesn't bother me. I don't have any problems with stress or things like that. I just go forward and I'm watching other cases, I'm mentoring the other staff. And we all looked at each other as if to say, is that really it? One answer. And it really didn't answer the question. That judge lasted about another 7 months. So we're trying to help create a culture in the city with judges and with cooperation with Judge Day that represents the kind of city that we want to be. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We will move on to the police audit updates. Michelle Crawford.
Wait for them to bring the presentation up. So Michelle Crawford, Police Auditor. So today I'm going to give an overview of the updates City Auditor, giving the Police Auditor updates for the second and third quarters to go over the work we've done. Next slide, please. So currently underway is our annual risk assessment process and development of the 2024 police audit plan. Additionally completed in the third quarter in August was the calls for service response audit, and I'm going to be giving you those overviews today. The objective of the audit was to determine the level of efficiency and effectiveness of APD's response to specific calls for service, including alternate responses. Our conclusion is that Aurora Police should evaluate how it responds to specific call types and better utilize call data. So a bit of background information for this audit, we reviewed computer-aided dispatch or CAD data from January 1st, 2021 through March 13th, 2023 when we started the audit. And we looked at unique calls for service, which is what's depicted in the graphic. One of the areas of call types that we reviewed was alarm responses. 62% of incoming alarm calls ended as false alarms or canceled calls during our reviewed period. The number is likely higher just due to the multiple categorization for alarms and how they're being used. The volume of false alarms and canceled alarms indicates a need to reevaluate the response. Other agencies across the nation use alarm programs, including alarm permit programs, which can ensure that alarms are installed correctly to limit the number of false alarms. There's also alarm fees and training programs and other approaches across the nation in order to reduce the false and canceled calls for alarms. Our recommendation is Aurora Police evaluates how they respond to alarm calls. It determines if an alternate response, such as a false alarm program, would reduce the number of false alarms and canceled calls for alarms. For response times, APD is not actively measuring or monitoring priority response times. The priority responses indicates the urgency for the call and how it's being responded to. Setting a measure for priority response time and measuring against it allows the agency to know how they are performing and indicates where changes may be needed to operations. Our recommendation is to develop priority response time metrics, develop the procedures to monitor those metrics, and then develop a reporting process to report back out on those results. Additionally, to use the metrics to inform response changes and changes to call prioritization. Canceled calls is the top final category for the priority 1 calls for service, and priority 1 being the most urgent calls for service. They also represent 15% of all calls for service. Our observations included sergeants monitoring calls for service and canceling calls where a police response maybe was not needed, and also that the process may need to be reviewed for improvements from the receipt of a call to it being dispatched and assigned to officers. Canceled calls can divert resources from higher priority calls, resulting in possible delayed responses from both Aurora 911 and Aurora PD. Our recommendation is that APD analyzes the priority 1 cancel calls to identify any significant drivers that's requiring them to be canceled to make any operational changes needed. Policies and procedures need updated, and there's some conflicts that exist between them. For APD, the call priority directive, so what is setting those priority 1, 2, 3, and 4, is from 2004. The alarm response protocols is from 2005. For Aurora 911, they have been keeping up to date on their call priority levels, but they're now conflicting with APDs because they're out of date. Additionally, for Aurora 911, protocols need to be reviewed and updated to reflect the changes in APD's practices. For online reporting, there's conflicts between the police department's directive, the front desk standard operating procedures, and the police department's website on online reporting and how it's used. Additionally, there's no direction within the police department directive and Aurora 911 protocols for when an officer must respond to a call type that has been designated as an online report. Aurora Police and Aurora 911 policies should be in alignment, and when alignment does not exist, incorrect information may be provided to the caller or responders, and the wrong response could be deployed. Our recommendation is to update the policies to reflect current practices and to work together to update the policies between 911 and APD, and also to work together to determine those exceptions to online reporting. There have been 2 efficiency studies to update responses to certain calls for service in the police department. A lack of follow-through and implementation of recommendations has resulted in misunderstandings regarding the implementation of those changes to the response for certain calls for service. Our recommendation is to review the prior efficiency studies to determine if those recommendations should still be implemented. If those are response changes, PD needs to work with Aurora 911 to implement those changes and communicate those changes to stakeholders and our residents. There are multiple call categories that exist for similar call types. As a result, calls may not be categorized correctly, resulting in poor data and reducing the department's ability to make those data-driven decisions. At minimum, PD needs to review the alarm call categories, determine if the categories are needed, and also simplify the process for officers so calls are being categorized correctly. APD has an opportunity to increase collaboration with city departments to respond more efficiently and effectively to better serve our residents. We reviewed 10 warrant calls for service. 4 of those calls emanated from the Municipal Center campus here. We are aware that APD and detention are currently working together on procedures where people can turn themselves in directly to detention, not requiring an officer to respond off the road. Additionally, we reviewed 10 parking calls, and we saw one good example where the call was transferred to Access Aurora for Park Aurora to handle. And we are aware that there are some limitations to what Park Aurora can respond to. Our recommendation is to continue to identify areas to collaborate with other departments such as Court Administration, Park Aurora, Aurora Fire Rescue to ensure the most appropriate responses to calls for service. And with that, are there any questions?
If I could, a couple things. So one, as you heard there, I think we're working on a very old directive. And so right now, police and 911 are working to essentially go through and redo, starting from scratch, from the beginning, our priority dispatch, right? So we're going to redo within that all of our priorities. We're going to redo our calls for service. So kind of in there that what you're hearing was that right now we have about 130 different call types. We're expecting our call takers to kind of be able to correctly really make very minor distinctions there, and that's not best practice. And so as part of that effort that we're going to do, we're going to greatly reduce those numbers of call types. And so, for example, I'll give you one that we've talked about, which is we might have a call type for car theft. We might have a call type for carjacking. We might have a call type for puffer. Well, all of those at the very heart of it are car theft. Somebody stole a car. That's what we need to do. When you go through the priority dispatches, you then get to the other criteria. Was there a weapon involved? Was the person, you can then get to some of those same answers in terms of, was it a carjacking or was it stolen off the street with nobody present? We can kind of get to some of those things, but asking our call takers to sort of know what puffer, car theft, it's too difficult. And then that's difficult for police to report on when they're running that report, because then their crime analysts have to know, oh, well, if I want to do car thefts, I know to include car thefts and carjackings and puffers, and versus just like, well, I want car thefts. Okay, we're gonna report on car theft. So we need to go through, we're gonna clean that up. That's well underway. I know it's a priority for the chief's office. They really want to do that. They want to get to making sure that when we send something out as priority one, our officers know that that's, a priority call, and then that's very clear to them. So that's the goal of that. We're gonna try and move through that very efficiently. Once we think we get through that, as was noted by the auditor, we then think we've got a number of, and you all have heard about it before, some of those efficiency studies, type of calls that we're doing. We think we then go back and look at those to say, hey, is there anything we didn't cover with sort of this holistic, kind of ground up approach? I see, retired, I'm gonna go with smart guy, Jim. I don't know what rank you retired at. Retired smart guy, Jim Pouchon, I think was probably one of the early authors of those efficiency studies and hasn't let it go. So he's probably here to make sure that we get that right.
That's why I exist.
There you go. So, but I think this is something the department has recognized for a long time. And I think the direction we're going now, given some of the findings in the audit, where the chief's office at, where Tina's office at, is really kind of do that from the ground up. Once we get through that, we'll come back, walk you all through what that protocol looks like, how that reacts. And then, as the auditor said, the important part of that, once we go through that priority dispatch process, is to then figure out how to communicate it to you all, how to communicate it to the public, so that everybody understands when a call comes in, this is how we're triaging it, this is how we're dispatching it, and these are the resources that we're going to apply. Very similar to that on the police side, and Michelle is the police auditor, but we have a very similar effort that's been underway with Tina and fire, as fires look to kind of right size their response as well. So they're doing a very similar exercise right now with fire that includes looking at the medical protocols. Again, we're dispatching the right resource. So if it's a very low acuity call, as you heard from Chief Auden, I think last month, we're not necessarily sending a 4-person firefighting apparatus. There are certain calls that we can identify that we don't need to send a 4-person firefighting apparatus to a sprained ankle, toe pain, things like that. So those are two very major efforts that Tina Shop has to kind of get with our public safety partners on to make sure we're getting what they want out of the dispatch, so that everybody's understanding of when a call comes in, these are the questions we expect our dispatcher to ask, and then these are how we're communicating it to our first responders so they have the information that they need. So big picture, that's kind of the biggest thing coming out of this. There's some other ones in there. We will be back on the alarm permit thing. That's something we've talked to council a number of years ago. I think this is good data to know that we've got some work to do on that. So we'll be back to talk to you all about that. And then, as you saw, there's a couple of other efforts underway. We appreciate the partnership with the detention center to, as we've got now this ability for folks to determine if they have warrants out there, how do we quickly and efficiently, take care of outstanding warrants without necessarily having to pull an officer off the road. So Chief, Tina, Chief, on anything to add?
Chief on our business.
Just real quick, I know it came up on alarm response. I know Chief Acevedo and I talked about this because it kind of surprised both of us when we looked at our policy. Obviously, do you guys know what our policy is? The Aurora Police Department will not dispatch officers out to alarms with only one zone activation.
Oh, yeah, but we've experienced that.
Right, so there are off-the-shelf programs out there that can help us implement alarm permitting. And I know the big bold here says the city of Aurora does not mandate or require permits for alarms, but it does a couple things. One is, we know there's a permit number associated with, so if somebody doesn't have an alarm permit, they're on full notice that we're not going to send a police response. In order to get a police response, you got to have an alarm permit. It's an annual renewal fee. I mean, council could set that $50, $100 a year, whatever that is, helps pay for that. But the bigger thing is we can track those alarm calls that are false. And so after this, whatever the policy is, after the second or third, people start getting fined for having false alarms because they're getting fixed. So I think that's what Jason's talking about, all that going together. I think there may be an initial upfront cost to do that, but once it gets going and when we get everything implemented, that's something that you all are interested in.
And I'll tell you, it also will help with the fire department, because now with carbon monoxide monitors, things like that, they're getting some of those false alarms as well. So I think it's just in general, they probably have a slightly different in terms of a fire alarm, but even then, I think some type of program ensuring that things are working appropriately just helps all of us in terms of those false alarms.
Yeah, the first question that the dispatcher asked, right, is what's the alarm permit number, right? Because we'll have to give that, anybody who has an alarm will provide that to their, alarm provider, that they'll know when they call the Aurora dispatch center, that's the first thing they're going to give is the alarm permit number. So, okay.
So just a couple of points to these recommendations. Number one, I'll just briefly touch on alarms. We are also looking at technology, and it's called ASAP to PSAP, but what this will do for us is automate a lot of the communication between alarm companies and our emergency communication center, with some safeguards inside those monitoring companies to vet the appropriateness or the authenticity of an alarm prior to that data being pushed into our CAD system for response, which will save on response time for legitimate alarms. But I think it will help us to filter out some of those, those false calls. And then to speak to the protocol transition, I think what this will do for us fundamentally is the police protocol is basically 36 chief complaint areas in law enforcement. And then within each of those chief complaint areas, there's priority levels from like 1 to 6. And that is going to allow us through our question and answer with our reporting parties, the ability to automatically identify calls that need immediate response. We can even prioritize them to alert to recommend an AMRT response, or this one is low acuity and it's an online report, but it's very prescribed and consistent, so that when we are fielding those calls for service, that we're arriving at the same answers consistently for similar situations. And it doesn't matter the time of day, the day of week when you call, that's happening. Additionally, that also allows the police department the freedom to say, when this specific circumstance exists, we will make that a priority one regardless, and then that's an emergent response. So I think that data will also be available to paint the picture of exactly the types of calls that we're responding to. What are we receiving, and then how are we responding to those calls? Because we currently don't have that method in place, with everything being lumped into singular event types. It's not giving us the granular data we need to tell the story of the needs of our community or how we're responding to it. So this is a really important step, because it's going to allow us, number one, to use our resources more efficiently and be sure to respond to those high acuity calls fastest, always. But then number two, we're able to be accountable to our community and tell them the story of how we're serving them, and this process will allow us to do that.
Anybody else have anything?
I'd love to talk about the efficiency study really super quick. So one of the things that I've heard from officers ever since I've been here is the efficiency study. We're not doing the efficiency study. What's in the efficiency study? And I think even officers that weren't even here when this efficiency study was done were like, hey, how about that efficiency study? And so I've just kind of gone back through the whole thing and worked with Sarah and War 911, and we've nailed down some things, and the rest of the team in the police department, and to get to kind of like a bottom line. What's a real bottom line of where we're at with the efficiency study? Because I think looking at some of the items, there's a few of them that we don't feel like are appropriate to implement. And one of those would be like welfare checks. I think the recommendation was that, let's say somebody's calling from out of state about a loved one they haven't heard from this loved one that they normally hear from, they haven't heard from them. And the recommendation was that we wouldn't have a PD response on that. We would call like an employer or some other social services to go over. Well, I think a welfare check in that nature, the PD should be responding to. And so we just worked that out as a team. There's a few of the recommendations in efficiency study that I think, that we determined that we would still do a police response on, maybe a little bit of a tweaking. So we're at a point where we have gotten to the bottom line on this as a department, where we're going to be. And so over in the next week or so, we're gonna start hitting all the roll calls, and not just pushing it out like online, but actually going and talking to the officers and having the conversation, so that all the officers know where we're at with the efficiency study, and on the points in terms of the things where we didn't go with the recommendations in the study, that they know why and have an opportunity to have a discussion about it, so they know why we're not doing it. So that everybody's on the same page, and then hold us accountable. So for instance, if one of the recommendations is we're not going to run a certain type of call, if the officers get dispatched to those circumstances, hey, you're going to run the call, or a supervisor can cancel the call. But let us know that call slip so that we can, have a better improvement and then be able to look at it instead of just like, well, we're still getting dispatched this. No, let's see the actual examples of where these calls are still coming out so that we can better, partner together on that. So, I think that's gonna be really important over the next few weeks for us to start rolling that out so that everybody's on the same page, study.
All right, well, with that, thank you, Michelle. Last item, public safety action plan update.
Sorry, one more point. I think this might be Michelle's last update as the police
I
auditor.
hope so.
So we're gonna be moving to her replacement. So yeah, so thank you, Michelle, for your work. I know everybody appreciates it. She's the intro auditor. She's the city auditor. So yeah, so thank you, Michelle. All right, section 1 is needed resources and getting fully staffed. So you kind of see the numbers there in terms of where our staffing numbers are. We are continuing to see overall staffing levels are kind of dropping. We have seen the good news is, we'll go to the next slide here. There we go, scroll down, you're missing the headline numbers at the bottom. There we go. 33 started on Monday, so that is helpful. That is good news, getting us towards back being fully staffed. We are already well into recruiting class 24-1B, so we are shooting for a very similar number, if not higher, for next year. So there's, again, trying to get fully staffed into that. So those are the staffing numbers. And then you can kind of see the training that we did. The big thing I'll highlight there is when you scroll down, you'll see that on that are the use of force trainings. So the use of force trainings were really high numbers there that we needed to do in order to be compliant with the consent decree. So the department made a concerted effort to get through that. So we appreciate that. And you see those efforts on training numbers. So any questions on that first area?
Well, so you mentioned that the recruiting is underway for the first one. Any early indications of, are we gonna see another 33 or is this 33 yet?
I don't see Sarah. We gave an update at Civil Service Commission earlier this week. I think our numbers are at this point looking similar, yes. And so I think we actually had 2 candidates defer. They made it pretty far, if not all the way through the process for this academy. For personal reasons, they asked to defer, so we should have 2 folks already lined up for that. And we're seeing numbers that are similar to last year. So I think they're slightly below in terms of numbers, but overall, I think the numbers are similar. So I think we're hoping to do over 100 interviews. We'll do conditional offers based on that. So I think the numbers right now is we're thinking similar. Chris, anything to add to that?
No, we're gonna get into the interview process here in a week. Yeah, the numbers look very close.
Okay. Second item is data collection, and being data driven. So again, year to date, overall, crime numbers are down with 2 major exceptions. Those are burglary from commercial premises, so in our businesses, we're continuing to work on that. And then the other one is
Larceny, shoplifting.
shoplifting, larceny. Thank you. So those are the two kind of major exceptions year to date, and then you kind of see some of the more recent numbers that we're seeing here. 2 of those numbers, I'm assuming, since that's the last 4 week, are the bodies that we found in an alley in northwest Aurora. We think that those were dumped here, but they'll still count our totals until we were able to determine otherwise.
And I think one of those is also RTD. Did we fix it on here?
I believe it's been fixed.
Okay. We had the murder on one of the RTD tracks. And so over a previous IGA that nobody seemed to be able to find, that it seems like the RTD properties are county. So even if they're in the city of Aurora, if they're on the property, in essence, the report goes to the county. It's not ours. So we'll make sure of that. So, but one of those initially, right, Chief was on report. We thought we fixed it. I don't know if it got fixed in here.
Right, so initially, obviously we work the homicide, even though technically it's Arapahoe County. And so we were already so far into it because we have the agreement, so minor things, we work, so we do stuff there all the time. We don't just say, hey, this is the county, because it's like right there. And so this turned into homicide. And so we were so far into it that we continued to work it, and they were actually able to make an arrest in that case. And primary point being, it shouldn't be carried as a city of Aurora homicide because it didn't happen in the city of Aurora. And so we were making sure that that didn't count.
We'll verify that, but either way, if we're still down year to date, so it's another one that will take off, we'd be further down, so.
Third area is youth violence, and so Jessica, any updates to add for that?
Yeah, just the implementation of the SAVE program. We have a couple of youth identified that we'll be doing our first custom notifications with in the next couple of weeks. We got our first reporting from our NOFOs, so we've already served over 500 youth there. The numbers are in there. We'll be adding sort of success stories to kind of humanize the data in the next couple of months, but things are going well.
Kind of see some good data there in terms of both age of youth, and let's just go through. We actually have some of the zip codes of those served, so I see those numbers as well. Fourth area is our crisis response team, mental health clinicians. So Courtney, updates. Nothing, okay, she's got the numbers there.
And then on homelessness, pretty big month, 67 abatements is higher than we've had, I think, ever. And then with 27 people moving into the pallets, we're really trying to move folks out of some of the longer term, being a few months in the pallets, to free up space for folks coming out of abatement. So that's something we've been working with Salvation Army on to have more open spots for folks.
Is there any update on the grant from the state?
So the mayor and I talked to the governor on Monday, and I got an update from Department of Housing. They're finalizing their review. They confirmed our application's complete. They have everything they need from us. They're doing all their scoring, and the recommendations are supposed to go to the Department of Housing Board, I think the first week of October. So we should know right after that.
So assuming you did it, then we have an RFP out, right, for an operator, and then do we then move forward?
We received those back last week. So we're in the review process for those. We had three folks put in for operations. So we're vetting that. And so we are looking to do an update for council as soon as we hear from the state with sort of how much funding. Hopefully we're getting some from the state, what the gap might be in the operations. And so we'll do a full update for council.
Do you anticipate that it'll be less than, I think it was 25 million we were hoping for?
We applied for 22 million. I think it will be less. The state had 6 applications totaling $85 million, and there's 52 million total to distribute. There was 45 million, and the state is moving some ARPA money from a different program into this. So I anticipate it will be less than 22. But we have 20 million as a starting point. And so whatever else we get. And then we've also been doing some work getting ready to be able to reach out to foundations to fill some of that other gap.
What was the total amount that we felt like we needed to have in order to move forward with some of the plans that get presented?
I think it's scalable. I mean, the very preliminary numbers we originally put together were right around 50 million, but with 20 million, we could still do something. So whatever we get from the state, and if we can plug in some additional from foundations, we can right size the facility, we can phase it. I mean, there's a lot of options for what could happen.
What we've generally told the state is, because the state, knowing they're oversubscribed, has kind of said, so tell us about it. And we didn't want to negotiate against ourselves. And we said, look, we're not saying it's all or nothing, but to the degree you give us anything less than we asked, it's going to delay us. We're going to have to go back, value engineer, phase, look to do some gap funding. So we've generally told them, if you want us to move quickly, give us everything you asked us, right? But we also didn't want to, have it be, well, we can't give you 22 million, so we won't give you 20 million and we'll move on. So we that's generally how we've postured it with the state is anything less than what we asked for just delays us because we have to revisit the project.
Anybody have any questions? Anybody have any miscellaneous matters for consideration?
Just put one on your radar. We do have an item that will probably be back with next month. I think it'll be next month, and it's gonna come from Julie and Judge Day. I think it's going to be the ordinances that are required to bring us into compliance with some changes in state statute related to domestic violence. Yeah. So just want to give us a quick update on that, just kind of put it on your radar.
Yeah, if we can just bring that, we can bring a draft ordinance for your consideration. That goes into effect January, so we just wanted to get our ordinance on the books that mirrors the type of VRA things that are required from the state statute.
And then your cables, Chief.
Just a couple of quick items. One, I wanted to bring up the Station 9, that will come in front of council, I think at the next meeting. It's related to a change. So Station 9 has a foundation deficiency that's caused some structural issues with one of the walls. We've had great partnership with Capital Projects, and they've evaluated the project, and they're looking at doing a scrape and rebuild on that project. And so if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer, but I wanted to share it with you before it comes up.
So this is one way to project would identify some of that ARPA funding to use to deal with, it was going to be a pretty significant renovation. And as we got into sort of evaluating the station, the condition of the station, they went, yeah, you've got foundation problems. So it turned out that, you know, we were better off scraping it, fixing the foundation, going again. So again, it's a good partnership between fire, public works, capital facilities to really look at some options. So we'll be having a contract come to you all and kind of start to bring on the consultants we need to get through that.
The other item is we've got a pretty big honor this Saturday. We're going to be placing 2 AFR members. They're going to be placed posthumously on the AFF Memorial Wall in Colorado Springs. And so that's a pretty big deal. I'm sending out talk to Jason about sending out a citywide email just to let people know it's the first time that's happened. And so I wanted to share that with you as well. Speaking of the priority dispatch changes that around PD and the right sizing response that we're working on right now, we anticipate that to go live early October, so the first week of October. We're shooting for October 5th. And so that's moving along. I know we talked about it in setting, but I just want to share that project is moving along. And then finally, I know we talked a lot about attrition, but we have a recruitment process that's closing tomorrow. And at the last poll, we had 670 applicants.
It changed from Tuesday. Wait, well, that's, man.
66 a couple days ago. So that's really encouraging that what we're doing with recruitment is working, and we're also going to be expanding that to kind of mirror what PD's done, which is pretty fantastic with epic recruiting in that site. So we're going to be engaging that too in advance of our next hiring process. And so we anticipate a recruit academy of 30 starting February 5th. Thank you.
Any of the Candace, Rich Day, Elizabeth?
All right, our next meeting is October 12th at 1 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks all.
No.
I gotta go to this office for a minute and then I'm gonna head back.